The lines are so blurred now between the internal messages, because your internal people end up being your external marketers, sometimes your brand ambassadors, right? So you want to set that up well. And we know we've seen memos that were internal, shared externally, and then there's, PR and earned media spin with thought leadership. So everything's really connected.
On today's The Claw, I am joined by Cynthia Hayes, who is the managing partner at Liger Partners, and we are going to talk about communications, specifically related to mergers and acquisitions. So if your company is in the process of doing that, how do I communicate that well? Or just communications in general. When do you send the right message to the right person within your organization to communicate something new or different? So join into The Claw and find out how you can improve your communications. Welcome to The Claw. I'm Eric Holtzclaw, Chief Strategist at Liger Partners, and we are joined today by Cynthia Hayes. She is the Managing Partner at Liger Partners. And what you don't know or may not know about Cynthia is she has a superpower.
Do tell.
She is the queen of communications.
Ooh.
Yeah. And you have a background in that, right? That's kind of what you grew up doing.
Grew up, yes. I'm still a child, though.
Oh, okay. I say that too. What do you want to be when you grow up? But
yeah. So the last 20 years has been marketing and communications for me. So any message that needs to be told to any audience, helping to frame that well, talk about it well. And then my master's is in organizational and corporate communications. Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is we talk about marketing being more complex than people think it is. They're often think about the advertisement, which is the fun part. We love doing that. But from a marketing perspective, we end up with a lot of projects that are around communications. So if someone does an internal mission, vision, and values, or they're about to acquire another company, it's a big part of it.
It's so, the lines are so blurred now between the internal messages, because your internal people end up being your external marketers, sometimes your brand ambassadors, right? So you want to set that up well. And we know we've seen memos that were internal, shared externally, and then there's, PR and earned media spin with thought leadership. So everything's really connected. The lines are so blurred between communications and marketing that all messaging matters, whether it's internal or external.
And interestingly, something that's happened recently is, I don't know if we're Verizon customers, and so we got that economic impact charge or whatever, which they have just been raked over the coals online about that, because it's basically they're increasing their prices, right? And I think they send it on a Saturday or a Sunday, and then the things I've seen this past week or so is they made $14 billion in the first quarter of the year, and then they send out this note. So that's an example of communications that could have been potentially done in a different or interesting way. So as we think about communications, because I'm not going to make you judge Verizon, I can do that, and companies, because we work with a lot of companies that do they're doing merger and acquisition, or pulling another company in underneath their umbrella, or need to align corporate values. What are some things we should, because I'm not necessarily the best at this, right? Told you once, don't know why you don't remember it. Those types of things. You're much better at that kind of cadence and those types of things. What are some tips and tricks that companies should consider when they think about communicating just news?
Well, so I think actually assessing who are your stakeholders, coming up with that list, right? It's not just the obvious people, your C-suite. If you're thinking internal communications from an M&A perspective, right? You've got your C-suite people, you've got your investors, you've also then have top line managers, middle managers, entry level, so you've got all these different buckets of people who then those people have access to different communications. So there's different emails that go out to the C-suite than would go out to your clients or your agents or your entry level would see. There's newsletters, there's all kinds of things. So assessing who you're talking to first, getting a realistic view of who that is, and then thinking about what their concerns are going to be with this message. So you're presenting you're announcing something, maybe it's a product launch even, right?
Right, yeah.
A product launch. So your internal team needs to know certain things. The accounting team needs to know different things than, the product team, than the marketing team. They all have different questions and messages that they need to receive in order to feel confident about what this means to them, how it impacts them, what's expected of them, given this news. So trying to stay ahead of all of that takes a lot more time than just like, oh my gosh, we have this announcement, just push it out there.
Yeah,
That's all you need to know.
So you mean like, deciding 2 days before you want to send out a press release, hey, we should send out a press release, may not be the best way?
No, probably not. Probably not. You could do it. It's been done.
Yeah.
But no, being really thoughtful about it, is always helpful. Sometimes you don't always have the time, but as best you can to, just take note, inventory who your stakeholders actually are, because there's more than you're originally, that come to mind than you're originally thinking. Yeah.
And we follow EOS internally, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, which is based on traction. And one of the things I like in that process is that they intentionally make you think about cascading messages.
Yes.
So something that you've talked about at one level of the organization, well, who else needs to know this?
Who else needs to know this? And what pieces of this do they need to know? What do they care about? What do they not care about? And then being open to receiving that feedback too of like, if they have questions, what does that communication loop look like? How are they going to get those questions back up to me or over to me so I can answer them in a timely way, right? So it's efficient.
Yeah. So, talking about the different constituents and that there has to be, it's just not one message. So I think that's a really important thing to understand. And just don't send off that email that you think is going to cover everything, because it probably isn't. Like, I always think about the companies that just like make the terrible mistake, like the way that they did that, right? Like, it's like, hey, we got everybody on the Zoom call and we laid everybody off, or we, sent out an economic impact charge to our clients and didn't think maybe that was a goofy way to call it that, right? Because there's that time when you give out a piece of news and you don't realize the way it's going to hit,
the impact it's going to have.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. As a lot of times the easiest way, because you're never going to nail it, be totally perfect with it, flawless. But if there's a clear way for them to communicate private channel their questions or concerns, or to get clarity or to encourage that clarity up front. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out, right? Like, that's a meaningful statement, because I probably do have questions. And if you've given me that email, then I'm not going to Twitter with my who are they?
Right.
Who do they think they are? kind of comments. I'm instead emailing support at, or Eric or Maria or whoever it is with my specific question. So then if it's a big, or lots of people are coming to Maria with that question, then she can put out another piece of communication that resolves that, or, build in some extra things. Oh, we didn't consider this. We're going to add it to this landing page as a FAQ or something.
Yeah. So it's a balance of the message, but also having kind of good avenues in place. Because if it's an internal thing, holding one-on-ones with your employees so that they can
voice those direct concerns or ask questions, get clarity.
Because as leadership, you're used to talking to the group, and some people don't want to have the conversation that way. They want to talk about something.
No, not in front of others. A lot of people don't want an audience when they're trying to work through what this means to them, and they don't want to have all these eyes judging their questions or anything or perceived that way. So one-on-ones are usually safer for most people. And then there's the vocal people who will, throw out their opinions on what you just said or what that message is. And then you have to be prepared for those thoughtful responses. So you're not just reacting to the person in the moment. I guess that's another element to plan ahead too, is like, what are the questions, in the earned media world, it's always anticipating, what are they going to ask next, right? I'm going to put out this press release. They're going to call me, hopefully. what are they going to ask me as a follow-up?
Right.
And I need to be prepared on the spot to answer those. So thinking through like what those extra questions might be or concerns and having answers prepared ahead of time.
So a little role playing.
Yes.
Yeah, kind of preparing for the jury.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Like you said, when you're prepping an executive for interviews, you're like peppering them with questions, just like presidential debates, how they practice. What if you get this question? What are you going to say?
Right.
And then they're going to try to rile you up. And then how are you going to keep your demeanor and, redirect the conversation the way you want it to go?
Well, that's an important component as well. So doing some media training with key people, because it's interesting because we're doing a project right now and we're talking to a bunch of thought leaders. And
Yes.
one of the follow-up questions I'm asking is, have you ever had media training? And none of them have. Not a one of them. Now they are representing their company. They're great stewards, but I had one lady in particular who said she didn't, and she wanted it because she got backed into a corner. And she made a statement.
A horrible feeling.
Yeah, and then she's like, and the statement went to like CNN and all these other places.
Oh, and they'll pull it out of context.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
It's totally pulled out
to
of context.
suit whatever newsreel it needs to, fit into for that day. Yes. So the media training element is super helpful, and I've seen it done, and I've gotten to do it with some people, and I haven't had to be the one that's trained.
Yeah,
But I help prep others.
I did Toastmasters for years, and then I went to a thing called Speakeasy, which is sort of an advanced. I think they're here based in Atlanta.
Is there a secret door you have to knock
There
on
is,
to get in?
yes, there is. And I actually felt there were two executives who were there because their company was going through something really negative, and they had been selected as the spokesperson, and they had really never had to stand in front of the press or answer questions from journalists.
Yeah.
So they were both practicing, how do I deliver a good message, and at the same time not do something I'm not supposed to do. It's a very
Right.
difficult position.
It's so different than if you're used to being on a stage and just giving a presentation, answer some follow-up questions on your specific topic, and then exit stage right. It's very different than engaging with a journalist or someone from the media who's going to write their own opinion about or their own spin on what you've shared.
Yeah, and it reminds me, recently watched the documentary on 3 Mile Island that's on Netflix.
I haven't seen it.
It's a good exercise in communications. So what
Okay.
happened at all the different levels and who said what to whom, and like there's one press release where I think the government officials went in thinking it was one thing, and then they got the expert up and he said something that just like torpedoed.
Blew it out of the water.
Yeah, they were learning it at the same time the public was,
yeah.
what he was about to say, and and they interviewed the guy who was there. He's like, yeah, so we weren't expecting him to say that, so you don't really want to be, it's kind of like being in a trial. You never want to be surprised by the answer. So.
Sure.
Well, when we get back, I want to dig in a little bit into specifically around M&A, because in the M&A world, one company's acquiring the other. How does that get communicated both internally? Do we need a press release from both companies or just one? Who takes the voice? Those types of things. So we'll continue this train on communications. So you're listening to The Claw, the marketing podcast for C-suite executives. I'm talking today with Cynthia Hayes. She's the managing partner at Liger Partners and the queen of communication. So we will be back in just a second.
Thanks so much for watching the Claw podcast. We'll be back after this short break. The Claw podcast is brought to you by Liger Partners. Liger Partners is a premier marketing firm where we save the world from boring, broken marketing. We get underdogs recognition because you deserve it. For more information, go to ligerpartners.com and follow us on all social media platforms at Liger Partners.
You're listening to The Claw, which is a podcast for C-suite executives, marketing executives, or executives, either way. I don't know. I never get that right. And I am joined today by Cynthia Hayes. She is the managing partner at Liger Partners, so basically she tells all of us what to do. And she has a great background in communications, which is a good thing to have in that seat, because
Isn't it,
it's all
though?
about communication. I'm always like, why don't people know this? And Cynthia's like, we may need to tell them again, or in a different way. And we work a lot with companies that are in the middle of a lot of M&A. Like majority of our portfolio is kind of B2B, M&A, companies buying other companies.
Yes.
And so what are some best practices? Like, so company A is about to acquire company B. Do we both put out a press release? Whose voice is what? Like, how do we start to navigate the fact that these two companies are going to become quote unquote one? Because sometimes they're not one.
Right.
They're still going to stand separately.
It's one of those lawyer answers where
It
it's
depends.
like, it depends.
That's a consulting answer too. I like it. Yeah.
But it does depend. So sometimes there's a really large company who's acquiring a smaller company, and the smaller company, it's less impact on them, right? Maybe they have 3 employees. They can sit at a table and be like, hey, this is how this is going to happen. Or maybe it's, a huge company acquiring, another company that has like 700 employees. And then there's layers of communication that have to happen. So having those town hall moments or those informal touch points, newsletters, all that kind of stuff where they're told their essential information, and then there's a place they can go, maybe on their intranet or something if they're that large, that communicates all the essential information internally. And then if they have a lot of external stakeholders who are going to be impacted by this business change, then it makes sense to have 2 different press releases because they have 2 different audiences they're informing. They'll be on 2 different radars. So there is.
So it may be like one company's in one industry and one's in the other. So the people who care might be different.
Are totally different. The publications who would care are totally different, right? So yeah, it depends. The fun answer.
It depends.
But that's what we do. We help people navigate that. Like, so think through all these scenarios and like, so what is your situation? Who are your stakeholders? Let's take inventory of that. What do they need to know? How is this going to impact your business? Is it, it should be improving it because now they have access to something through this merger or acquisition that they didn't have before. So, lots of fun messaging. Like, what's in it for me? They always want to know, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the unique things and that I like about our work is we get into these messy situations where it's like, okay, so company A and company B are going to become company A or company C, right?
Right.
And what does that mean?
Yeah, the whole cultural shift. Like you and I have touched on this before. Like there's sometimes if a large company is absorbing a smaller company, acquiring them, it's just assumed that the smaller company will assimilate into that larger company's culture. And sometimes the smaller company doesn't know that that's the assumption. They think they get to continue on as they are. For example, like I think you and I probably run into this just with our own personalities, but you can imagine on a corporate level, there's a culture that likes to socialize. Like I want to talk through my ideas and want to get everyone's buy-in before I really move forward. And then there's a culture where it's like, you're the decision maker of this. Make your decision and go. Like, let's chop. Let's go. Why do you?
What are waiting on?
Why are we talking about this?
Right.
Right? Own it and go. So if you think about that, like with 700 employees coming in who are used to socializing things before any movement is made, but when movement is made, everyone's bought in, everyone's moving together, it's all fine. They're combating with these people who are like just making their decisions. It's interpreted. It causes friction, right? It's like why there's misunderstandings. There's just different ways of doing things. Causes that friction, causes that distraction, messes with productivity, and then all of a sudden, you're having conversations that you could have avoided, right? If you had planned a little better and set those expectations up front. Because aside from assimilation, like maybe there's like this coexistence of 2 different cultures that makes sense in some context, where it's like I've bought 2 restaurants and one is high end and one is fast food, but I own them both. They don't want to adopt the same culture. Like you don't want them to, right? Different benchmarks, different KPIs, different clientele, all things, but they could share best practices, right? So there's some of that can come into play. And then there's the, hey, we're coming together regardless of our size, and we're going to stop and pause and figure out who we want to be now that we are together and kind of recreate a new culture for the company. But again, it's all pausing to do that, being intentional then about how you design that and how you share the messaging with your people so they're all aware and on board, and not just saying like we heard the other day, oh, I heard those are our core values.
Yeah, I know. I saw them on a website one time.
I was told that was us.
That was us. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, no, you should be embodying them if they're your core values.
You should know them pretty easily. And interestingly too, looking at kind of goal of those acquisitions. So we'll work with companies where they're like, oh, it's a great cultural fit, right? Like that's why we're merging these businesses together. And then we have companies that are just, it's a land grab. So they're looking for, increasing their book. They want new technology that they don't have. And cultures is a secondary or tertiary thought.
They're not thinking about it, but it is one of the major factors that acquisitions don't go well.
Yeah.
They circle back. It can take a few months because everyone's getting adjusted. But I think one of our clients used a great term where their team was aqua-hired.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I didn't hear that.
Yeah, so all of a sudden, they're like a team of 40, and they've never really interacted maybe with one or two people, but that's it on that team. They don't even know each other. They don't know the workflows. They don't know the tools the other people use, so there's all kinds of considerations that have to be taken into place that feel like soft, and we don't really need to focus there, but they impact your bottom line because they get in the way of productivity. They also cause attrition, with people who have all this tribal knowledge now are just gone because they're just frustrated by the situation. So,
well, that's where communications plays a really important role, because we talk about, in the absence of information, people make up
their own story, and it's usually worst case scenario.
Yeah. We watched like the first episode of Stranger Things season 4. It's kind of scary.
Is it? I haven't seen it yet. Don't tell me.
Scary. I'm not going to tell you, but it is like, you're like, wow. And that's just people, again, back to mind, your mind makes up like, this is, and it's not that at all.
Right.
And sometimes leadership is, just absent or not paying attention. But it's also, we're in these rooms with leadership is trying to decide, what do we tell people when?
Yes.
And they may not know enough at that point either. So it's like, well, do we rock the boat, even though this may not happen or it won't look this way? It's like this really delicate balance between everybody.
It is. And sometimes you have to make tough choices. But I think at the end of the day, as long as you're being, authentic and honest and transparent and ethical, then you don't have to be scared about it. It's more of providing a way for them to ask those questions, like we talked about, so that if you do put out a message too soon for them, from their perspective, and they're like, wait, but I have all these unanswered questions, providing a way that they can, or a person they can go to with those who can say, that's still being decided, or we're still working through exactly what that means, but here's what I can tell you, and provide at least as much clarity as is available. But it's humans interacting with humans, so it's always going to be a little messy.
It's a little messy. Yes, humans are messy. We talk about that a lot, right? And that's what we do, is we sell things to humans all day. No matter if you're selling a service, a product, you've got humans involved. You've got to communicate the right message.
Yeah, but it is important from the get-go to have that end result. So you're always pointing people back to we acquired XYZ because they bring this, and this is how it's going to benefit you. It's going to be a little messy getting there, but in the end, this is what you're going to, be left with. This I can tell you, right?
Yeah.
This is where we're headed, and recasting that vision and that goal so that at least they understand and can persevere through the wonky times because they catch the vision of what it means in the end.
Yeah, and even acknowledging that it's going to be a little messy.
And that you're feeling it too.
Oh, yeah.
Like leadership feels the same, and the added pressure. So we feel the wonkiness and the strangeness and the added pressure of knowing that we're responsible for everyone else's feeling of that.
Right.
Is that extra pressure. So we get it. But we have to move forward somehow. So this is the way we've chosen to move forward.
Well, very nice. Yeah. Well, I want to have you back, because I'm not going to do this to you today, but I think what we should do is have another show around communicating when bad things happen.
Oh.
So, because we talk about that. There are
like
a lot
crisis communications.
Yeah, crisis communications, because so many companies we know need to have it, and they haven't built good plans.
No, and then you're left reacting in the moment instead of having a thoughtful response already in place.
Yeah, because like we could use like even like an example. I got a couple of examples. I'd love to hear what you think.
Oh, I've got a couple too.
They could have done differently. So, well, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
You had to travel so far.
I know.
So I've been speaking today with Cynthia Hayes. She's managing partner at Liger Partners. You've been listening to The Claw, which is the marketing podcast for C-suite executives. We've been talking about communications, in particular communications when you may be in the middle of M&A or need to deliver news. Like, how do we talk to the different constituents in the right way? Until next time, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Claw podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe, rate and review this podcast. And if you or someone you know wants to make an appearance on this show, email us at yourbestie@ligerpartners.com.